If you don't already know what a tariff is, and apparently a lot of people in the United States have no idea what a tariff is, it's a tax that a company pays on imported goods. The purpose of a tariff is to encourage companies to stop outsourcing parts and labor overseas and find a way to produce goods in their own country to avoid having to raise prices. If that's not possible, then theoretically, tariffs will encourage consumers to stop buying foreign-made products and buy the American-made equivalent instead. For example, let's say Best Buy wants to stock up on PS5s to sell during the holiday season. Normally, they'd buy them wholesale from the manufacturer for $450 and sell them for $500, netting them $50 in profit. And yeah, the profit margin for a PS5 is actually less than that depending on the size of the retailer, but let's keep it a nice round number for this example. So one day, a convicted felon wearing clown makeup imposes a 20% tariff on imported goods from China. What used to cost Best Buy $450 now costs $540, and that means they can't sell the PS5 for the same $500 they did before, because then they'd lose $40 per unit. If they want to make the same $50 they're used to making on a PS5, they'd have to sell it for $590. In other words, the tariff gets passed on to the consumer, making it a tax that the consumer pays in addition to sales tax. So after more essential products become more expensive as a result of that universal 20% tariff, people's disposable income becomes more limited, making them a little more hesitant to pick up a PS5 on an impulse buy, especially when an American-made Xbox is a hell of a lot cheaper. Even though Xboxes are also assembled in China, they could easily be made in the States if the insurrectionist sex offender in the White House does what he said he will. Either way, the end result is that PS5 sales drop dramatically. And that means Best Buy wouldn't import any more consoles because they'd still have stock in their warehouses. Eventually, Sony sees that PS5 imports have slowed as a result of the Chinese tariffs, so they try to figure out a loophole. Some economists and political analysts have posited that they could do this by moving production to another country that doesn't have a tariff imposed on it, like Vietnam or Malaysia. It wouldn't be as cheap as manufacturing in China without the tariff, but it would still be cheaper than making stuff in China with the tariff. But why go through the trouble of importing goods in the first place? Why not just cut out the middleman and produce PS5s right here on US soil? The economists I just mentioned will say that that's not possible because the cost of labor in the United States is so much higher than it is in East Asian countries. But that's not true. The cost of labor here is in fact 10 to 20 times less than it is anywhere else, and that could actually drive the price of a PS5 down. But you'd pay the price in other ways. If what's looming on the horizon comes to pass, you would pay a terrible price.
If the US imposes a blanket tariff on Chinese electronics, Apple isn't suddenly going to start building iPhones in Kansas, never mind how long it would take them to do that. They'll move production to India, they'll move production to Vietnam, where labor and supply chains are already being developed for cost efficiency. Instead of buying a $1,000 iPhone made in China, you'll pay $1,200 for the same phone made in Vietnam. No new jobs in the US, no new factories in the US.
David Pakman echoes what countless economists have said on TikTok. Universal tariffs will raise prices for consumers, drive up inflation, and essentially be a hidden tax on American families. But none of the political commentators I've seen since the 5th of November have factored in an extremely important aspect of America's labor market. Or should I say, its forced labor market. Yeah, that's right. I'm talking about slavery. A lot of people, especially those in other countries, aren't aware that the United States never actually abolished involuntary servitude. The 13th Amendment to the Constitution outlawed forced labor, except as punishment for a crime. And if you think prison labor is just innocuous stuff like pressing license plates, I got news for you.
Around 1,600 incarcerated people work as firefighters in California, making up as much as 15% of the state firefighting force, CAL FIRE.
In fairness, prison firefighter programs are voluntary, and most of the inmates who participate in them actually think they provide a lot of benefits. It gets them out of their cell, the food is usually better, and it knocks time off their sentence. But inmate firefighters make between $5 and $10 a day on average, and even though they can make up to $24 a day when responding to an emergency, that's still an atrociously small amount of money to give someone who's risking their life to save yours. Obviously, though, that's an extreme example, and giving nonviolent offenders a chance to work off their sentence through public service sounds like the type of rehabilitation that a so-called correctional facility should offer. But where do you draw the line? What if states decided to cut costs by using prisoners in other first responder roles? Imagine calling an ambulance and when the paramedics showed up, the back of their uniform said DOC. Or what if the mayor of some megacity allowed prisoners to serve their time by arresting criminals alongside the same police officers who put them in prison in the first place? It might sound like the plot of a dystopian thriller, but don't think for a second that that's not something that could happen in our lifetimes. Once again though, in the name of being fair, if states used prisoners as first responders, criminals would be paying their debt to society by saving those states' tax dollars, potentially lowering taxes for citizens. It only sounds like a problem if correctional facilities started leasing their prisoners out to private corporations as slave labor. But there's just no way anybody would ever do something so morally reprehensible, right?
A 2-year Associated Press investigation found that everything from grains, meat, eggs, and milk had been grown, harvested, or produced by incarcerated people. And their labor finds its way into the supply chains of some of the most recognized brands and largest food companies in the world.
Oh. Yeah, that's a problem. In 2024, the average cost of labor in China was about $6 an hour. The average cost of prison labor, on the other hand, was almost 10 times less than that, a measly 65 cents per hour. In some state prisons, work isn't optional, and if prisoners refuse to work, they can be reprimanded or put in solitary confinement. You know how much prisoners make per hour in those states? You guessed it, nothing. Not 1 red cent. Now, you might be thinking that some prison jobs could potentially be good for a prisoner's rehabilitation. After all, it could lead to a career path when they're eventually released from prison. And you'd be dead wrong about that. Because here's the beauty of this horribly corrupt system. A lot of the companies that employ prison labor to cut costs have policies that make applicants ineligible for employment if they have a criminal record. A good example of this is McDonald's, a company that has no issues with paying prisoners 30 cents an hour to process their barely edible ground raccoon meat burgers, but won't hire those same laborers to flip those burgers for minimum wage. That's one of the reasons why so many former convicts struggle to find work after release. It's the system working as intended. Without any job opportunities, they're forced to return to a life of crime to make ends meet, and that lands them back in prison, making pennies an hour working for the same company that rejected their applications when they were out of prison. By this point, it should be pretty obvious where I'm going with this. There's a non-0% chance that the price of a PS5 stays low because a prison inmate was paid next to nothing to build one. And if you think a company would never use unskilled prison workers to make high-end consumer electronics like smartphones and game consoles, think again. Corporations have been doing that shit for decades. I was shocked to find out that prisoners were subcontracted to assemble semiconductors for IBM. Yeah, that IBM. And remember when I said Xboxes could easily be made in the United States? That's because Microsoft is also a customer of the cheap labor that for-profit prisons offer. Unlike McDonald's though, it's actually confirmed that Microsoft does in fact hire ex-felons. But why the hell would they when the market's about to get flooded by a massive surplus of slave labor?
Anytime a detective goes sticking their nose where it don't belong, there's one thing they hope they never find. Something that makes sense. When a connection is found between two events that for all intents and purposes should be completely unrelated, the investigator's obligated to find a god and pray to it that they're wrong.
The way for-profit prisons work, a private company offers to house and guard a state's convicted felons for less money than the state would pay to put them in a state-owned prison. Theoretically, this saves the state, and therefore taxpayers, money. But there's a catch. The contract between the state and the prison company guarantees a certain number of prisoners. If a state doesn't provide the prison with the minimum amount of heads in beds, that results in a fine that costs the state way more than if they had used their own prisons. So to save money, the state is forced to put people in prison and keep them there, even if those people don't deserve it. That also incentivizes the state to prevent those who've already served their time from finding jobs after they're released. In 2021, Rusty Dusty President Both Feet in the Grave signed an executive order that ended the government's contracts with for-profit prisons, a decision that was tragically rescinded on Inauguration Day 2025. The good news, though, is that more and more states are ending their contracts with private prison companies every year. However, there's one aspect of the prison industrial complex that both federal and state governments have never broken ties with. And it's so abysmally horrible to even think about that I don't even want to say it out loud, for fear that in some way, it would make the idea more real. In the United States, the two biggest incarceration corporations are CoreCivic and Geo Group. Despite contracts expiring left and right, these two companies have stayed in the private prison industry by operating detention centers for U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, also known as ICE. All of you should be making this face right now. One of the main policies that the botched hair transplant recipient campaigned on was being tough on immigration, and he's promised to institute mass deportations when he assumes office. Just like that idiot's stupid-ass wall, though, it's highly unlikely that deportations will occur anywhere near the scale that was promised. However, deporting someone doesn't happen overnight, and while an undocumented immigrant is waiting to be shipped back to their country, they can be held in a privately owned detention facility indefinitely. And since the for-profit detention facilities get paid for each person they detain, they have an incentive to make the paperwork as complicated and difficult to process as possible. Imagine you've been stuck in a 6x8 cell for a couple months. The room's designed for one, but the greedy bastards who run the place stuff some rando in there with you to double their profits. And you have no idea how long you're gonna be there. Some of the other detainees in the facility tell you they've been there for literal years. Then one day a guard comes to your block and asks if anybody would be interested in getting out of their cell every now and then, while the government purposefully fails to figure out what to do with you. You say, yes, please, I'll do anything. And the guard's like, anything? Then he takes you and 50 other people to a big room and sits you at a table with a box of scraps and an instructions manual that says iPhone 20. If that sounds like a ridiculous scenario that could never happen, then I'm begging any higher power that might be listening that you're right and I'm wrong. Connecting two unrelated dots? That's pretty scary. But connecting any more dots than that? That's approaching doomsday territory. Let me lay it all out on the table. Here are some of the policies Agent Orange and his cabinet have already implemented or plan to implement over the next 4 years. We already talked about tariffs and mass deportation. Roe v. Wade was overturned in 2022, ending a woman's constitutional right to medically safe abortion. The next steps involve eliminating sections of the federal government like the Department of Education, while at the same time increasing the budget for the military. And where does most of that military budget actually go? To defense contractors like Boeing and Lockheed Martin. In other words, the plan is to take money away from children and give it directly to weapons manufacturers. If this doesn't infuriate you, not a problem. Not a problem at all. 'Cause I got enough rage to spare. So, how do all these pieces fit together? It starts with Roe v. Wade. And let me be clear, it's impossible to call yourself a good person while also claiming to be pro-life, because it's never actually pro-life, is it? The ones who claim to believe that abortion is murder are the same people who vote to eliminate public service programs that help women after they give birth. You know, I actually had the chance to ask a pro-lifer why they thought it was a good idea to force children to be born into broken, dysfunctional homes where they'll likely be exposed to extreme poverty, domestic violence, hunger, homelessness, physical and psychological abuse, and other things too horrible to even mention. In response to that, they shrugged and said, that's what you get for spreading your legs. This is actually a commonly held belief among entitled white men. They think being forced to give birth should be the consequence for committing sins of the flesh, something that isn't against the law, yet women should still be punished for it. Women should also be punished for being sexually assaulted, and the newborn child, who also had no say in the matter at the time of conception, should be the one who serves the sentence. Some pro-lifers might say that they don't agree with any of that, they just think it's wrong to kill an innocent unborn child. And that's fair. The problem, though, is that people who think abortion is murder also disagree with the doctors and scientists who say that it isn't. See, people like that make decisions based on what their ignorant and uninformed gut feeling tells them, instead of what they've studied and researched to be true. I can only speak for myself, obviously, but in my opinion, healthcare decisions should never boil down to, those are just my beliefs. Everybody else in the developed world is laughing in America's face right now. If that wasn't a major warning to pro-lifers that they were on the wrong side of history, then they should have been clued in by the fact that they're trying to achieve the same goal as blatant misogynists. But they didn't take the hint, did they? In fact, they never take the hint. And that's because pro-lifers tend to have empty space between their ears. Again, that's the system working as intended. It's in a government's best interest to keep its citizens uninformed, because stupid people are stupid easy to manipulate. And rest assured, the absolute last thing the right-wingers want is for people to get an education. Why? Because the data consistently shows that the less educated someone is, the more likely they are to vote red. So, a bunch of red states make abortion illegal, forcing impoverished, uneducated teenage girls to give birth. You think those girls are going to be able to finish their education and achieve some semblance of upward mobility in their life? No, of course not, because those girls are sinners. They must be punished for the rest of their sinful lives, and so should their bastard children. The children of those poor teenage girls grow up in poor neighborhoods with poor, underfunded schools on the brink of being shut down. Then things get even worse when the government eliminates the Department of Education, taking funding away from public schools and making it impossible to go to college without taking out a high-interest loan and selling a kidney. After growing up in a system like that, what do you think a poor bastard kid's future job prospects look like? What future job prospects? In the unlikely event that one of those kids makes it to their 18th birthday, the education system will have given them zero marketable skills. Kids today can't even string a coherent sentence together. Just look at the comments section of this video. You think they're going to be able to put together a resume? So how are they supposed to make ends meet when the cost of living keeps going up year after year, while the federal minimum wage has been $7.25 an hour since 2009? The way I see it, they have two choices. Crime, which is great because they don't have any skills, so of course they're going to get caught. And when they're sent to prison, they'll be exploited as slave labor by corporations that give a cut of their profits to lawmakers who made what the kid was doing to survive a crime in the first place. The other choice, for a poor, uneducated kid with no skills and no job prospects, is the military. The same military that the Orange Injustice wants to use to enforce his immigration policy. I wish, with every atom of my existence, that this was nothing more than a crazy, crocked-out conspiracy theory. I was convinced that it was, until I saw pages 102 and 103 of the 2025 Mandate for Leadership, also known as Project 2025. According to the mandate, the Conservative Party wants to improve recruiters' access to schools and require completion of the military entrance exam by all students in schools that receive federal funding. Of course, students wouldn't be forced to join the military since a lot of them wouldn't even qualify, but that's not the point. The very thought of public school students having to take the ASVAB in order to graduate, also recruiters can prey on them like vultures? It's disgusting. You know all these anti-woke hillbilly parents who oppose gender-affirming care and critical race theory in schools? The funny thing is, they protest on the grounds of being against child indoctrination. Conveniently, though, they turn a blind eye to child indoctrination when it comes to the nation's military, something that could actually get their children killed, fighting in a senseless war, all because Uncle Sam has a $2 trillion contract with Lockheed Martin to buy fighter jets. Oh, and guess who assembles the body armor and ballistic helmets for that military? Yeah, the same prison slave laborers who build all the furniture for the schools. Speaking of schools, if the Department of Education gets shut down, then so will the most underfunded and underperforming public schools. A lot of people might think that's a good thing, and to a certain extent, it is. We should get rid of broken things that don't work. But the alternative to a state-funded public school is a state-funded charter school that's run by a private company. Charter schools are required by law to be nonprofit operations, but that hasn't stopped people from making money off of them. And some experts are speculating that public schools will eventually go completely extinct, meaning all K-12 education in the United States would be administered by charter schools. If that happens, that would open the floodgates for charter schools to be sponsored by Fortune 500 companies as a way to foster brand loyalty from a young age. Imagine picking your kid up from Kirkland Academy, a charter school designed to indoctrinate children with Costco's corporate values as early as possible. Well, as long as the hot dog and soda combo stays $1.50, right? It would actually be dead simple for the CEO of a private prison company to open a charter school and turn it for a profit, collecting tax dollars for every student on the roll sheet. And that CEO would be incentivized to funnel students directly into their prisons after graduation day to maximize the amount of money they can extract from each kid. In other words, those children would essentially be sentenced to prison from their first day of kindergarten. And what's stopping a for-profit charter school run by a for-profit prison company from making students put Xboxes together as part of the curriculum? Not a goddamn thing. See, the corporations that run America, and therefore all the other capitalist countries in the world, their entire business model falls apart without a working class of poor people to exploit. So they've engineered a system to ensure that their working class is born generation after generation, which to me is no different than farming livestock. And anybody who doesn't fall in line will face the firing squad, comprised of other poor people who are that desperate to make a living because they were bred like dogs to have no other options, and they were raised like cattle to die in the slaughterhouse. If the scenario I just laid out for you sounds gonzo bonkers insane, good. I want to keep my horrible vision of the future as far away from reality as I can. But no matter how ridiculous these ideas might seem, it's not good enough for them to just be highly unlikely. It needs to be impossible for anything like this to ever happen. Ever. So what can we do? The truth is, not a whole lot, because unfortunately, most people just don't care. And they can't be persuaded to care either, because the human mind has evolved to prioritize self-preservation over things like emotional intelligence, a strong moral compass, and a sense of empathy. Let me show you what I mean. In the 2024 election, California, the bluest of the blue states, had a proposition on the ballot to end forced labor and slavery in state prisons. Proposition 6 had virtually no opponents, while people in favor of the measure raised nearly $2 million to get the word out. Despite all that, though, 53% of Californians voted to allow the state to keep using prisoners as slaves. So the measure failed, and afterwards a lot of people were left wondering why. My only guess is that in addition to just not giving a shit, most people think that if someone winds up in prison, they deserve whatever happens to them. Worse than that, though, is the fact that people have also been duped into buying into capitalism. Like, they literally buy into it with the table scraps given to them by the billion-dollar megacorporations who they think have the right to exploit them. Look, I'm a level with you. I don't have the skill or the patience to convince some idiot to use the logical part of what little gray matter they have for the first time. So if you want to get active and spread awareness, knock yourself out. Just don't be surprised when your words fall upon deaf ears, because the fact of the matter is, the world's changed a lot since the French Revolution. If, by some miracle, you have a genuinely viable solution to fix this broken-ass timeline, links are in the description. Blue Sky, Twitch, it's all there. Yes, there's a Discord server, but you gotta be a patron to get access to the Discord server. So shut up about the Discord server, alright? Ain't nobody give a shit about your stupid fucking weeaboo Discord bullshit. Look, I'm sorry. I'm a little stressed out right now, okay? There's a lot going on. Anyway, I guess I'll engage in some escapism and go play video games while they're not still being made by slave labor. Thankfully, games are only made by people who are expected to work 60 to 70 hours a week with no overtime pay. Ah, fuck.